For 6 months I cooked alone, ate alone, and went to bed at 8 o'clock just to have something to do. And the whole time, my son-in-law had no idea I had already spoken to my lawyer. Let me back up. My name is Victor. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the city of Edmonton, helping design overpasses and drainage systems and all the unglamorous infrastructure that holds a city together. I retired 3 years ago with a full pension, a modest investment portfolio, and a house I'd owned outright since my wife passed. A 4-bedroom house in a quiet crescent in St. Albert, backing onto a ravine. My wife, Lorraine, planted those trees along the back fence herself. She died of pancreatic cancer 8 years ago. And when I say that house was all I had left of her, I mean that in the most literal sense. Her garden, her curtains, the dent in the kitchen door frame where our daughter ran her bicycle inside at age 9. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter because that's what she is, and that's what matters. She married a man I'll call my son-in-law, because naming him anything else would give him more than he deserves. They'd been together 4 years before the wedding. I paid for most of the wedding, not because they asked, because I wanted to. Lorraine would have wanted a proper celebration, and so I gave them one. $60,000 at a venue in Canmore, flowers everywhere, an open bar that went 3 hours over. I danced with my daughter to a song Lorraine used to hum in the kitchen. I cried, nobody mentioned it. That was a good day. They moved into a townhouse in Sherwood Park after the wedding. My son-in-law worked in oil and gas project management, he said, though I was never entirely sure what that meant day to day. My daughter worked in HR for the school board. They seemed fine. I visited on Sundays, brought groceries sometimes, fixed their leaking bathroom faucet twice because my son-in-law was not what I would call handy. It was about 14 months into the marriage that things started to shift. He lost his contract. The oil and gas sector had been turbulent for years, and a lot of people in that industry were cycling in and out of work. I understood that. I didn't judge him for it. But he didn't find another contract. Weeks became months. My daughter picked up extra shifts. When I visited on Sundays, he was always on the couch, always watching something on his laptop, always with a vague explanation about applications being out. I'd sit at the kitchen table with my daughter and feel the weight of something unspoken between us. Then one evening in February, my daughter called me. It was cold that night. We'd had a snap of -30 that week, the kind of cold that makes Edmonton feel personal, like the weather is specifically angry at you. She said they were struggling with the townhouse payments. She said it with that particular tone she'd had since she was small, the one that meant she was trying very hard not to cry. I told her I'd help. Of course I would. I transferred $15,000 into their account the following Monday. I didn't ask for anything in return. I told her not to worry about it. 2 months later, she called again. They were behind on the condo fees and the car payment. I sent another $8,000. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself he was trying. The third call came in July. This time it wasn't my daughter who spoke first. My son-in-law got on the phone and said, and I want to be precise here because I've replayed this many times, he said that the townhouse situation was not sustainable and that they had been thinking about options. He said the most logical option was for them to move into my house. I have 4 bedrooms. I live alone. The math, he said, made sense. He said this like he was presenting a project proposal. Calm. Efficient. Already decided. I said I'd think about it. I did think about it. I thought about it for 3 days. And I decided that family helps family, that Lorraine would have opened the door without a second thought, that a house this size was too much for one person anyway, and that maybe having my daughter Crows would be good for both of us. I said yes. They moved in at the end of August. The first 2 weeks were fine. My daughter made dinner twice. My son-in-law fixed nothing but broke the garage door opener somehow. I didn't say anything. I made coffee in the mornings and read the paper at the kitchen table and told myself this was manageable. The first thing he suggested was that I move my home office into the basement. I have a home office in the second bedroom. My old desktop, my bookshelves, 30 years of engineering manuals I've never gotten around to donating. He said they needed the second bedroom for when they started a family. He didn't say if. He said when. I said I'd think about it. He moved my boxes into the basement 2 days later while I was at a medical appointment. I came home, and my office was a pile of boxes in the corner of the basement. He leaned my bookshelves against the furnace. I didn't say anything. I moved the bookshelves. Then he suggested my bedroom. This happened over dinner, a Tuesday in late September. My daughter was quiet throughout the meal. He waited until I had finished eating, I'll give him that much, and then he said that the master bedroom, my bedroom, the room where Lorraine and I had slept for 22 years, the room where she died, was the logical choice for the primary couple. He said the basement could be made quite comfortable. He used the phrase, functional living space. He had clearly rehearsed this. I looked at my daughter. She looked at her plate. I said I needed to think about it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed and looked at the ceiling and listened to the house settle the way it always does in the cold. And I thought about Lorraine and what she would say. She would say, I know exactly what she would say. She would say, Victor, you have been polite enough. And she would be right. But I also thought about my daughter. And I kept seeing her face at that dinner table. And I thought, she is stuck too. She's stuck between a husband who has decided the rules and a father who keeps saying he'll think about it. And maybe the most useful thing I could do was not fight this battle loudly. Maybe the most useful thing I could do was get very, very quiet and get very, very prepared. I called my lawyer the next morning. His name is Gordon. He's handled my estate planning since Lorraine passed, and he is the kind of man who asks one clarifying question and then immediately understands the full picture. I told him the situation. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, do not sign anything, do not agree to anything in writing, and come in this week. I went in that Thursday. In the meantime, I moved to the basement. Not because I accepted it, because I needed time and I needed them to believe I had accepted it. The basement had a bathroom with a working shower, a small window that looked out at the base of Lorraine's old rose bushes, and enough room for a cot and a folding table. I set up my laptop on the folding table, and I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was thinking. My son-in-law moved through the main floor of my house like he'd always lived there. He rearranged the living room furniture. He put his hockey equipment in the garage where Lorraine's gardening tools used to hang. He started buying things. A new television, a gaming console, kitchen appliances I had not authorized, and charging them to a joint account he had somehow talked my daughter into opening with my credit card as a backup. I found this out by accident when my statement came in November. I did not confront him. I took a photo of the statement on my phone and sent it to Gordon. Gordon had been busy. He had reviewed my will, my property title, my investment accounts, and my pension documentation. He had also consulted with a colleague who specialized in family law in Alberta. He explained something to me that I had not fully understood before. Because the house was solely in my name, had been since before the marriage, and because there was no written agreement about the living arrangement. No lease, no financial agreement, nothing. I retained full legal authority over the property, he said. You can ask them to leave. You can give 60 days' notice. He also said, if you want to do this carefully, do it in stages. I thought about that word, carefully. My son-in-law, it turned out, was not careful at all. In December, I overheard a phone call. I was coming up from the basement to get a glass of water. It was past 11. The house was dark, and he was in the kitchen, speaking quietly but not quietly enough, because I have lived in that house for 26 years, and I know exactly which floorboard squeaks and which one doesn't. He was talking about the house. He was telling whoever was on the other end, a friend, a brother, I don't know, that his father-in-law was old, alone, and would probably need a care facility within a few years anyway, and that by then the house would essentially fall to them. He said the word essentially the way people do when they mean definitely. He said they just had to be patient. I went back downstairs and sat on my cot for a long time. I thought about patient. I thought about 31 years of work, about the overpasses still standing in this city with my calculations in their engineering reports, about Lorraine in her garden in July, her hands brown from the soil, telling me she wanted to grow dahlias next year, about my daughter at age 7 falling asleep in the car on the way home from the lake, her cheek against my shoulder. And I thought, I have been patient long enough. Gordon and I met again in January. By then, I had also consulted with a financial advisor, not my usual one, a different one, someone with no connection to my household accounts. I made several decisions in that meeting, and I want to be clear that none of them were impulsive or vengeful. They were deliberate. They were careful. I updated my will. My daughter remained the beneficiary, but the structure changed, a discretionary trust rather than a direct bequest, with conditions and an independent trustee. My son-in-law was explicitly excluded. Gordon drafted it cleanly. I signed it on a Thursday morning in a warm office on Jasper Avenue while snow came down outside, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not sadness. Something closer to clarity. I also began to move my investment accounts. Nothing dramatic. I wasn't hiding money. I wasn't doing anything improper. I was reorganizing. I moved my RIF into a structure my son-in-law had no possible line of sight to. I changed the beneficiary designations to reflect the new trust. I had a separate TFSA I'd never mentioned to either of them, and I confirmed it was still tidy and untouched. Then I began to look at properties. I had no intention of moving into a care facility. I was 64. I was healthy. I had a full pension and a disciplined financial history. What I needed was a home that was mine again. I spent 3 weeks browsing listings with a realtor in Edmonton, a woman named Sandra, who had also lost a spouse and understood immediately what I meant when I said I wanted somewhere quiet, manageable, and mine. We looked at condos downtown, a bungalow in Glenora, a 2-bedroom unit in a newer complex in Oliver with a rooftop terrace and underground parking. I made an offer on the Oliver unit on a Wednesday afternoon. It was accepted by Friday. I said nothing to my son-in-law. I said nothing to my daughter. Not yet. I had one more thing to do. Gordon issued the formal notice in February. 60 days, as required under Alberta's residential tenancy framework for a non-paying cohabiting family member in an owner-occupied property. The letter was delivered by a process server on a Tuesday morning. I was not home when it happened. I had gone for a walk along the River Valley Trail I used to take with Lorraine on Saturday mornings. The ice was thick on the North Saskatchewan. The sky was that particular pale blue you only get in Alberta in February, cold and enormous and oddly beautiful. My son-in-law called me 4 times in the next 2 hours. I did not answer. When I came home, he was standing in the kitchen with the letter in his hand. My daughter was sitting at the table. Her face was, I don't know how to describe it exactly, not shocked, more like someone who has been waiting for something and is relieved it has finally happened. He started talking very fast. He said there must be a misunderstanding. He said we were family. He said they had nowhere to go, that he'd been close to landing a contract, that this was not how people treat each other. He said a lot of things. I let him finish. I have never been a man who argues over the other person's voice, and I didn't stop that day. When he was done, I said, I know about the phone call in December. I know what you said about the care facility. I know what you meant by patient. He went quiet. I said you have 60 days. Use them well. Then I looked at my daughter. I said quietly, just to her, I love you. That hasn't changed, but I need you to see clearly. I think part of you already does. She started crying. He left the room. We sat at that kitchen table for 2 hours, my daughter and I. The same table where Lorraine used to help her with homework. The same table where we had Christmas dinner for 20 years. She talked and I listened, and then I talked and she listened. I told her about Gordon. I told her about the notice. I told her about the Oliver condo and what Sandra had shown me. I told her about the trust and what it meant for her future, even if she couldn't see the structure of it yet. I told her that I was not abandoning her. I was removing myself from a situation that was slowly making me invisible in my own life. I told her those are different things. She nodded. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. She said, "Dad, I know, I know." I moved into the Oliver condo on the 1st of April. My daughter helped me pack. My son-in-law did not. They were gone from the house by mid-March. A rental apartment in the Juche, I was told, which was closer to a work site he'd finally managed to contract onto. I don't know more than that, and I didn't ask. The house in St. Albert went on the market in May. It sold in 6 days for $412,000 over asking. Sandra cried. I did not, but I stood in the empty kitchen one last time and I put my hand on the dent in the doorframe and I said goodbye to Lorraine the way I had been putting off saying goodbye for 8 years. Then I walked out and locked the door and drove to Oliver and made coffee in my own kitchen. The rooftop terrace of my building looks northwest toward the river valley. In the evenings, when the light goes orange along the tree line, I sit out there with a cup of coffee, and I think about 31 years of building things that hold. I think about Lorraine and her dahlias. I think about my daughter who calls me every Sunday now without him on the line. I am 64 years old. I live alone. I sleep in a room that is mine, in a home that is mine, and I go to bed when I want to, and wake up when I want to, and there is nobody in this apartment who has decided the rules except me. That is what patience looks like. In the end, I keep coming back to that Tuesday dinner. The plate in front of me still warm. My son-in-law's voice, calm and rehearsed, like he'd already decided how the conversation would end. And my daughter, not saying anything, just looking at the table. I've thought about that moment more than I expected to. Not with anger, not anymore, more with a kind of quiet recognition. Because what happened in that house over those months wasn't random. It followed a logic. Every time I said, "I'll think about it," and then quietly stepped aside, I was teaching him something. I was teaching him that the space would give way. That patience, in my case, looked like permission. The thing I've come to understand, and it took me a while to get here, is that decency isn't the same as compliance. I was decent my whole life. I worked honestly. I kept my word. I paid for things without asking for credit. I helped when people needed it. But somewhere in that last year, I confused being good with being accommodating. Those are not the same thing. A man can be decent and still hold his ground. In fact, I think the holding is part of what makes the decency real. Otherwise, it's just a habit of giving in. Gordon used to say, and I always liked this about him, he never told me what to feel, only what was true. What was legally mine, what options existed, what a reasonable person in my position could do. That kind of clear thinking when you're in the middle of something emotional is worth more than most people realize. I was 63 years old and I still needed someone to lay out the facts plainly before I could see them. There's no shame in that. The shame would have been in ignoring them. What required the most from me wasn't the legal steps. Gordon handled those. Sandra found the condo. The will reason was a single Thursday morning. What required the most from me was the decision to stop waiting for my son-in-law to become a different person and to start acting on what I already knew. That's not a legal skill or a financial skill. That's something harder. It's the ability to look at a situation clearly, without the fog of hope that things will improve on their own, and then do the next right thing anyway, even when it costs you something. It cost me the house. It cost me Lorraine's kitchen, and her rose bushes, and the dent in that door frame. I knew it would, and I did it anyway. Because keeping all of that at the price of my own dignity wasn't keeping it at all. It was just living inside a memory that someone else had taken over. My daughter calls every Sunday now. We talk for an hour sometimes, the way we used to. She's figuring things out. I don't ask too much, and she doesn't explain too much. And that feels right for where we are. I sit on the rooftop terrace in the evenings, and the river valley goes orange, and I think I built things that are still standing. I raised someone who, when it mattered, looked up from the table. And I walked out of my own house on my own terms. That's enough. That has always been enough.